What's up, everyone? It's Jimmy here, kindly asking you to hit the like and subscribe buttons and ding the notification bell and turn on all notifications. Also, don't forget to leave a quick comment saying where you're listening from or what you're up to while you watch. For decades, the slaying of 3 women in Toronto and its surrounding region haunted investigators and families with no answers or arrests. The cases of 25-year-old Christine Prince, 23-year-old Claire Sampson, and 41-year-old Gracelyn Greenidge were all unsolved cold cases. They were separate tragedies with seemingly nothing linking them beyond their brutality. Yet in late 2025, cops announced a shocking breakthrough. The killer in all 3 cases was the same man, a previously unknown serial predator named Kenneth Smith. Astonishingly, Smith had died years earlier in 2019, meaning the long-sought culprit was identified only after his death. This revelation brought both relief and frustration. Relief that the mystery was finally solved, but frustration that the perpetrator would never face justice in a courtroom. The cold case trail began in the early 1980s. Christine Prince, a 25-year-old woman from Wales working as a nanny in Toronto, vanished after a late-night outing in June 1982. She was last seen boarding a streetcar along St. Clair Avenue West just after 1 a.m. on June 21, 1982. The next morning, her body was discovered in the Rouge River near the Toronto Zoo. Christine had been subjected to a vile assault, after which she was struck on the head and then drowned. Despite an intensive investigation at the time, no suspect was identified, and the case eventually went cold. Just over a year later, in September 1983, another young woman met a horrific fate. Claire Sampson, 23, was last seen on the night of August 31st, 1983, near the downtown core. Witnesses recalled seeing her in front of the Essex Hotel on Jarvis Street, getting into a car with an unidentified man. To put it in context, if you're not from the city, this is the area of town that's produced a fast food restaurant known by locals as the Hooker Harveys. The following day, Claire's body was found dumped on a rural property off a side road in Oro-Medonte Township, about 50 miles north of Toronto. Notably, that case was handled by the Ontario Provincial Police, meaning that an entirely different set of investigators were working the case. Claire had been shot twice, succumbing from her wounds. Like Christine's case, Claire's slaying remained unsolved, and police had no immediate evidence tying it to any other crime. Many years passed before the third victim lost her life under similar mysterious circumstances. Grace Greenidge, originally from Barbados, was 41 years old in the summer of 1997, living in the Jane and Finch area of Toronto and working as a nursing assistant. When Grace failed to show up for her shift on July 29, 1997, a concerned co-worker went to her apartment on Driftwood Avenue and found her dead. She had been brutally attacked and died of blunt force trauma. Once again, detectives collected evidence, but couldn't find the perp. At first, investigators saw no reason to connect these 3 attacks. The victims didn't know each other, and their backgrounds and ages differed markedly. The crime against Grace also happened nearly a decade and a half after the other 2 crimes. The methods of killing were also different. One woman was assaulted and drowned, another was shot, and the third was beaten to death. With no obvious pattern in crime scenes in different jurisdictions, the cases were handled independently. However, one common clue lay in storage all along: genetic evidence from the unknown attacker. For each victim, forensic teams had recovered samples believed to be the perpetrator's DNA. In 2016, decades after the slayings of Christine Prince and Claire Sampson, cold case detectives had crime scene DNA from those 2 cases reanalyzed. This led to a stunning discovery. The DNA profile from Christine's killer matched the profile from Claire's killer. For the first time, authorities realized they were dealing with a serial predator. A joint task force was formed to dig deeper into these linked cases, and in 2017, further testing linked that very same DNA to the killing of Graceland Greenidge as well. All three crimes, spanning from 1982 to 1997, were definitively tied to one person. Unfortunately, that DNA profile still didn't match any known individual in criminal databases. The killer remained unidentified, known only as a genetic fingerprint. With conventional investigative leads exhausted, Toronto Police and the Ontario Provincial Police turned to genetic genealogy to finally unmask the mystery man. In 2022, the team enlisted a specialized forensic lab to analyze the offender's DNA and search for relatives in public genealogy databases. The hope was that if distant cousins or other relatives of the unknown killer had uploaded their own genetic profiles online, and those could provide clues to his family tree. The gamble paid off. By late 2025, genetic genealogists identified a network of individuals related to the suspect's DNA. Working backward from those relatives, investigators zeroed in on a single name that fit the age and profile of the cold case killer, Kenneth Earl Smith. To confirm their suspicions, the Center of Forensic Sciences performed a direct DNA comparison between crime scene evidence and a sample from Smith. No word on how that was done, given that he was already deceased, but they were somehow able to get their mitts on his biological material. On December 3, 2025, the test results came back conclusive, and the DNA was a perfect match, identifying Kenneth Smith as the perpetrator in all three slayings. Far from a notorious criminal, Smith lived a largely unremarkable life that kept him off the public radar for the most part. He was born in South Porcupine, Ontario, and as a younger man he resided in Toronto during the 1980s and 1990s, the period when he committed these crimes. Years later, in 2013, he moved to Windsor, Ontario. Smith died there of natural causes in 2019 at age 72, never having faced charges. Although he was never caught for his most serious crimes during his lifetime, Smith was very much known to police. He had a history of violence, with records showing he was convicted and incarcerated for disturbing assaults on women on multiple occasions. In fact, he served prison time both before the early 1980s attacks and again before the late 1990s slaying, indicating a pattern of criminal behavior punctuated by periods behind bars. Investigators now believe Smith chose his victims opportunistically, with no clear pattern or connection between them. They believe he may have intentionally chose women who were entirely different from one another and employed different methods to kill them. According to investigators, this may have been done because he knew that serial predators generally develop a profile of victims and a method by which they like to commit their sick acts. With Kenneth Smith exposed as a serial killer, police have widened their investigation to see if he could be linked to any other unsolved crimes. Investigators say it's possible that additional victims of Smith exist who have not yet been identified. They're urging anyone with information about Smith's activities or other cold cases from that era to come forward. From my perspective, it's almost impossible to believe Kenneth Smith stopped at 3 victims. What we know about his crimes doesn't suggest restraint, escalation control, or a single triggering event. It suggests opportunity, compulsion, and confidence. These attacks span 15 years, multiple jurisdictions, and radically different methods. That alone tells me he wasn't a man experimenting or learning, but rather someone who had actively figured out how not to be caught for his worst offenses. His modus operandi was, in essence, doing something different every time he went on the hunt for a victim. Given that he was originally from northern Ontario and given how many unsolved disappearances there are in that neck of the woods, the authorities need to look heavily into crimes in that region. In 1982, fishermen discovered the stabbed body of 20-year-old Susan Becker in a Colorado mountain ravine. The man responsible was nowhere to be found, at least not by investigators at the time. In reality, the perp was a recently paroled convict who had already killed before and would kill again. This is the chilling story of John Agrew, a predator who evaded justice for decades. John William Agrew was born in 1947, and by age 18 he was already a killer. On July 21, 1966, Agrew lured his 15-year-old sister-in-law, Suzanne Marino, to a forest preserve in Joliet, Illinois. When she resisted his romantic advances, he snapped and stabbed her approximately a dozen times, brutally ending her life. That same day, Agrew shockingly confessed to his wife about the slaying, even driving her to the wooded crime scene to point out Marino's discarded purse and shoes as proof of his guilt. Urged by his wife to surrender, Agrew instead went to a church and confessed to a priest, who immediately alerted the authorities. He was arrested 2 days later and readily admitted he killed Susan because she had spurned him. With his confession and strong evidence, Agrew was swiftly convicted and given a 20 to 50-year prison sentence. The convict began serving his time in Illinois, but his criminal saga was nowhere near over. In late 1975, he was approved for a hospital visit in Chicago to donate a kidney to his sick sister, an event that presented an unexpected opportunity. On May 11, 1976, during his recuperation after the surgery, he slipped out of a bathroom window, fled the hospital, and stole a car to make his escape. He drove across state lines, using fake identities and switching stolen vehicles to evade capture. His taste of freedom lasted about a week. In mid-May 1976, police in Central City, Nebraska, spotted John Agrew with a stolen car and arrested him without incident. He was promptly extradited back to Illinois to finish his prison term, bringing his daring escape to an end. In January 1982, after serving roughly 15 years, this future serial predator was somehow paroled and moved to Colorado to live with relatives. He initially stayed in Boulder and later settled in Longmont. That summer, he crossed paths with 20-year-old Susan Becker near Boulder. Becker was a local young woman who loved the outdoors. She often went sunbathing in Boulder Canyon and was last seen by a friend on June 20th, 1982, heading into the mountains. In late June, Agrew ambushed Becker, stabbing her 13 times in the chest and neck before dumping her body in the wilderness of Boulder Canyon. Fishermen discovered Becker's remains on July 1st, 1982. Agrew was interviewed as a possible suspect, but investigators had no hard evidence linking him to the crime at the time. About a week after Becker's body was found, Agrew struck again. This time his victim was his 94-year-old neighbor, Orma Smith. Smith was a friendly widowed librarian who likely saw Agrew as a helpful new neighbor and trusted him. In early July 1982, Agrew invaded Orma Smith's apartment and brutally stabbed the defenseless woman to death. He then transported her body to a remote area in the Rocky Mountain foothills and left her in a creek bed. On July 9, 1982, Smith's body was discovered in a stream, and Agrew was immediately suspected in Smith's killing. Once again, though, they didn't have enough evidence to make an arrest, and Agrew, despite committing 2 slayings in 2 weeks, remained a free man. On July 15, 1982, Agrew attempted a third violent crime on this spree, an abduction that would finally lead to his capture. He accosted a 26-year-old woman at knife point in a University of Colorado parking lot, trying to force her into her car. The The woman fought back and managed to flag down a passing university employee for help, causing Agru's plot to unravel. Police arrived and arrested Agru on the spot. In 1983, he was convicted of the attempted kidnapping and received a prison sentence in Colorado. His Illinois parole was revoked as well, so Agru was sent back to Illinois to serve out the remainder of his original sentence for the slaying. Disturbingly, he only remained incarcerated until 1989, after which he was released and settled quietly in Joliet, Illinois. During his later years of freedom, Agru stayed off the official radar, and he wasn't linked to any new violent crimes. However, those who knew him noted his disturbing behavior, and he even bragged to his niece that he had once slain an elderly woman in Colorado. John Agru died on June 29, 2009, at age 61, from an apparent accidental overdose of prescription medication at his home in Joliet. However, startling evidence came to light immediately afterward. While cleaning out his home, relatives found multiple women's purses and pieces of jewelry. They also found newspaper clippings about the 1982 slayings of Smith and Becker and the attempted abduction. These grim trophies strongly suggested Agru's connection to the unsolved crimes and prompted investigators to take a fresh look. In 2010, detectives finally got the proof they needed, and they were able to test Agru's DNA with genetic material found at the two 1982 crime scenes. This evidence proved beyond a shadow of a cat's ass that John Agru was the one who committed these horrific acts. Federal and state authorities began reviewing other unsolved killings in Illinois and Colorado from the years Agru was free, investigating whether he could be linked to any further victims. However, as of 2025, no additional crimes have been definitively connected to him beyond the 3 victims already known. Hey everyone, just a reminder that there's also a YouTube membership and a Patreon, and you can support my work for as little as $1 a month. You wake up in the dead of night, vulnerable and alone in a remote location, only to be confronted by the one figure you're trained to trust, a police officer. That symbol of safety, however, was twisted into the key that unlocked an isolated motorhome for a ruthless predator. The initial victims were Gord and Jackie McAllister, a couple from Lindsay, Ontario, enjoying their retirement travels in their motorhome. They chose a secluded picnic area near Blind River in northern Ontario for a peaceful overnight stop. Sleep came easily until 12:55 on June 28, 1991, when a heavy pounding shook their vehicle. The man outside identified himself as a police officer and insisted the couple needed to move their recreational vehicle. This pretense of law enforcement, a simple psychological tactic, successfully coaxed Jackie into opening the door, circumventing the need for forced entry. The assailant immediately barged inside, destroying the illusion of safety. He was armed with 2 powerful weapons, a high-caliber rifle and a 20-gauge shotgun, and he swiftly demanded money and valuables. Jackie reached for her purse in compliance with his demands, likely thinking this was going to be a horrific robbery, but nothing more. But then the true nightmare began to unfold as the gunman opened fire. Tragically, Jackie perished almost instantly. Gord McAllister was also shot, but in the chaos, he managed an extraordinary survival maneuver. He rolled out of the motorhome and hid underneath it, praying the attacker hadn't noticed his escape and would continue running after the initial assault. This decision saved his life and allowed him to bear witness to both what happened to his wife and what would happen next. While Gord lay hidden beneath his vehicle, a motorist drove into the isolated rest stop, likely just trying to get some shut-eye. This individual was 29-year-old Brian Major, a family man who left behind a wife and a young son. Major's unfortunate timing placed him squarely in the predator's path. The gunman instantly diverted his attention from the McAllister's vehicle, seeing Major as a new threat who had to be eliminated. The killer quickly shot Major dead before fleeing the area on foot. Once the assailant disappeared, Gord McAllister, despite his wounds, crawled out and rushed to the driver's seat of the motor home. He drove immediately to the highway to flag down a passing trucker for help. Sadly, when emergency services arrived, both Jackie McAllister and Brian Major were pronounced dead at the scene. The sheer randomness and brutality of the incident terrified the small communities of northern Ontario, who quickly understood that a highly dangerous individual was now at large. The Ontario Provincial Police initiated an immediate and massive manhunt. The sole survivor, Gord McAllister, provided crucial information to investigators, working with them to develop a detailed composite sketch of the gunman. And seriously, this is perhaps the most bizarre and lifelike composite I've ever seen, so you're going to want to have a quick look if you're just listening. My understanding is that this composite was actually put together by a primitive computer program based upon Gord choosing a variety of features from actual people. A key lead materialized quickly. An eyewitness reported seeing a blue van speeding out of the rest stop area around 1 o'clock that morning, moments after the attack. The van was headed due east, traveling towards Sudbury, a small city in the vast rural expanse of northern Ontario. Given this valuable clue, the cops focused substantial resources on the van. The authorities investigated almost 4,000 blue vans in northern Ontario and across parts of the United States. However, despite this exhaustive search effort, the blue van and its driver vanished into the vast, desolate northern landscape. The failure to match the composite sketch or locate the specific vehicle meant the trail went cold almost immediately in 1991. While the active investigation stalled in 1991, the case never truly closed. For years, the Blind River Killer has remained a terrifying enigma. A breakthrough in Canadian cold case investigations came only years later, providing a possible, deeply unsettling answer to the identity of the man who terrorized the rest stop. Investigative focus eventually centered on Ronald Glenn West, a former Toronto police officer. West had been serving time for unrelated robberies in 1995 when authorities linked him, through preserved DNA evidence, to 2 killings in 1970. Notably, in both these cases, the attacker used the same sort of high-caliber rifle used at Blind River. The circumstantial evidence tying West to the 1991 rest stop attacks was compelling, despite his never being formally charged in connection with those specific deaths. West had lived in the Blind River area at the time of the 1991 attacks, and he somewhat fit the description used in the sketch. Notably, he had a history of impersonating an officer to gain control over victims, and he reportedly owned a blue vehicle, matching the crucial lead. Although West later pled guilty to the 1970 slayings, the deaths of Jackie McAllister and Brian Major have remained officially unsolved. At present, West is still alive and he's in his 80s. Fortunately, if he's the one who committed this horrific act, he's locked up for life. Unless he drops a deathbed confession, at this point it looks like the Blind River case may forever remain an unsolved mystery.